We try to entertain
Oh,
people
here we go.
during
I got
these.
it.
Okay.
I got it. Going live. You're live.
All four of us are alive.
I hope so.
Yeah. AI isn't quite that sophisticated yet.
Give me a second here because I don't see it on my console.
Let me check YouTube on my phone and see if it appears live.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
I hope so.
Wow.
All
That's
right.
us.
I'm just going to
That's
mute myself
us.
when I'm not talking because I'm not sure if you can hear outdoor noise. Let me just.
No, you're fine. Okay. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Corinna Cohn. I am one of the co-hosts of Heterodorx here with my co-host Nina Paley, whose name I do know, even though she accused me of forgetting it last episode of Heterodorx. We also have two guests today to have a discussion. We have Sara London and Stephanie Winn. Say hello, please.
Hello.
And we're going to introduce our guests here. Nina, would you like to read Sarah's introduction?
Yes. Sara London, MA, is an author and freelancer who writes psychology/mental health, mindfulness, modern therapy culture, and work-life balance content for a global client base. Her first book, based on her intensive graduate research program in psychoanalysis, The Performance Therapist and Authentic Therapeutic Identity, just came out this August. She's a columnist, creating think pieces and interviewing clinicians about topical mental health issues.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and introduce Stephanie, who's a former guest of ours as well. So if you're interested in this, check out one of our episodes from last year. But Stephanie is the host of her own podcast as well, called You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist, and the associate producer of the documentary No Way Back, The Reality of Gender-Affirming Care. In Oregon, where she is licensed as a marriage and family therapist, Stephanie has a small online private practice called Real Talk Therapy PDX, offering therapy without ideology. So Stephanie has dedicated a portion of her career towards advocating for the needs of survivors of gender malpractice and families that have been impacted by the ideological capture of the counseling profession. So welcome.
Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
So my understanding of one of the reasons that we're having this discussion is, Stephanie, you have become something of a public figure, or maybe even an influencer in the field of therapy, and very specifically related to helping individuals who have had some type of exposure to gender-affirming care, and either helping people have some form of therapy that is a little bit more expansive, or I don't know if even more traditional than what's called gender-affirming care at this point, and also trying to help inform people who are not in your therapy practice of some of the dangers that might be in front of particularly young people who are looking for gender-affirming care, and helping to educate family members that are parents and caregivers specifically, that their children might be attempting to start their own transitions without keeping them informed. Do I understand that's part of the setup correctly?
Yeah.
And Sara, if I understand correctly, part of the reason that we're having this discussion is that you have some concerns about how that information could be presented or relayed to parents, possibly in such a way that might cause those parents to overreact or misunderstand what their kids are trying to do. Do I have that
Yeah.
kind of correct? All right. So what we're going to do through this format is everybody's going to get a chance to speak. When you have questions that you want to ask one another, please direct the questions towards Nina or I. Nina, at any point, or myself, we might step in and ask questions to try to clarify things. And there's also going to be people in the chat who ask questions. And if they're good faith questions, that's what we're all here for, is a good faith discussion. We will ask those as well. And we already discussed this before we went live, but Stephanie's going to get some time here to develop her position. And then Sarah's going to get a chance to respond to that. Over the course of that, certainly there's going to be follow-up questions that all of us are going to want to ask, and that's what we're going to use to propel the discussion. Nina, did you want to add anything before we start?
Nope, it all sounds right to me.
All right, Stephanie, you have the floor.
Well, my position is simple. So this all started because I posted on, I still like to call it Twitter. It's always going to be Twitter to me, but I posted on X a list of warning signs for parents that their daughters may be using testosterone behind their backs. And the context, as you partly pointed out, Karina, the context in which this is occurring is that I've been a therapist for 10 years and a public figure for 2. So I had 8 years of being a therapist who wasn't really known outside of my own small community and just known to my clients. And a couple of years ago, I decided to become part of the community of podcasters, people who are active on social media, people who are blogging, because I had a lot of thoughts. And I know something that's on the table for us to discuss today is how therapists present their thoughts online. Part of my stance on this issue is that there's no such thing as neutrality. And that for me, as somebody who is a creative and thoughtful and intellectually very stimulated person, it's actually better for my clients if I have an outlet for that than if my only outlet is therapy, because then I'm making therapy about me. Now, I recognize there are trade-offs, right? That as a public figure, I've made certain choices I can never walk back. Not only the things that I've said, although my opinions on a lot of things have not changed, they may evolve, but that once you're a public figure, the internet is forever. And so, for example, I can no longer work with gender questioning people, right? I foreclosed on that possibility the moment that I stepped forth, unless that someone is, specifically looking for what I offer, which would be more like the detransitioners that I work with, right? So I recognize that I made a decision and that not every therapist is going to make that decision. But for me, the personal trade-offs in my life were that I had a need for expression, a need for dialogue with a greater community, and a need to speak out about some things I was very concerned about in the field. And so my therapy practice has shifted in terms of who seeks me out. Most of the people who seek me out for therapy now know of me as a public figure and are seeking me out because they're looking for someone who has my stance on those issues, right? So in this context, being somebody who is followed in large part by ROGD parents who are concerned about their kids. I create a lot of resources for those parents as a public figure. And then, some of those resources impact people who are my clients. A lot of it doesn't. So one of the resources I created was this Twitter thread, right? And so here's why we're here. I'm going to read my position statement that I, emailed you beforehand. Sara London has used the term insanely paranoid to characterize a post I made intended to help parents identify possible warning signs their teenage daughters may be using testosterone behind their backs. My position is simple, that her allegation is unfounded. Testosterone use in females is a real problem that poses a legitimate threat to thousands of families around the country. My choice to draw upon my professional expertise and personal studies to educate the public about warning signs of an adolescent's dangerous drug usage only differs in one regard from, say, alerting parents to dangers and warning signs pertaining to their teens' potential involvement in recreational drugs, anorexia, self-harm, or abusive relationships. That one regard is that in the United States in 2023, a concerned parent cannot count on the support of fellow parents and adult professionals to help them keep their kids off of drugs and out of harm's way. So the reason we're here, as far as I'm concerned, is that I would like Sara to defend or revoke her choice to use such language to describe my choice, calling it insanely paranoid. I know there's other topics we might talk about, but I hope that we can at least address that one issue.
I just want to clarify one thing. You said ROGD, that stands for rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is, I guess, the phenomenon of young people who never seem to be gender questioning or have any issues with their gender, all of a sudden in adolescence or early adolescence declare that they're trans.
All right, Sarah.
Here I am. I prepared a small statement, so if you see me glancing down at notes, that's what I'm doing. First off, of course, thank you, Corinna and Nina and Stephanie. This is a wonderful opportunity. I think this is going to be a really productive dialogue. I'm really excited for it. I kind of wanted to share the situation as I see it to put into context why I said that Stephanie was insanely paranoid, fear-mongering. The part of her online platform involves making threads advising parents on how to monitor their children. She said, the importance of keeping track of a period cycle or how to tell if a child is secretly injecting testosterone. So particularly her comments about kids secretly injecting hormones based on a TikTok, she outlines what are often ambiguous situations with numerous possible causes. So a kid spending home, she references they could be at Planned Parenthood, acne, voice changes, and she cites these as things that parents should look out for. So fundamentally, the core of what I disagree with is the projection of a politically motivated agenda onto a teenager's activities and contextualizing these multiply determined behaviors into anti-trans activism. So this boils down to seeing actions in one video, stripping them of context, and then using them as talking points for a preconceived agenda. So this is indicative of a larger issue, right? This is not personal to Stephanie. The thing that bothers me about Stephanie's post is something that bothers me about all therapist influencers, which is their role on the internet. So a lot of therapists online double as activists for certain social issues, and some of them I've seen do extremely well. But the problem emerges when an influencer's success becomes more important than the well-being of the population that they aim to support. I see that as irresponsible. And in fairness, I think a substantial amount of Stephanie's followers would ask, why is this irresponsible? It's raising awareness, it's teaching us about warning signs with her expertise, what could be so bad about a therapist being a social media activist? But by juggling both identities, one changes from being a therapist to kind of being a moral advisor, particularly on political issues. Just pulling lightly from Stephanie's feed in particular, I see stuff like, checkmate leftists, or in a podcast title, The Outcomes of Leftist Medicine, or saying that she finds conservative patients to be much more kind, respectful, and logical than liberals. That is a quote. And while activism might start with a micro audience, the influencer then kind of nestles into one side of the political aisle, where they become sucked into this divisive, tribalistic culture, which is far from the therapy room. So rather than using their elevated platform responsibly to support those who are struggling, they start to use it as kind of a cudgel to fight others who dare to disagree. And this original, very well-intended message becomes completely lost. So in this shift of identity, going from a therapist to a social media personality, certain hyperbolic methods of communication are then adopted as a way of kind of speaking the internet's polarized, reality-detached language. Polarized, not polarized. Polaroid is the thing you take a picture with, as far as back in my day. But I've heard it called internet brain before. It's the same thing, kind of like that. By nature, the shift from therapist brain to internet brain, it takes someone from the role of a healer to the role of a colluder. So one who encourages and participates in stimulating this detached social media culture. So Stephanie points out that she believes she's not trying to sound the alarm because her followers are already alarmed. She tweeted that. And there is some truth to that. And there are two studies I want to cite on that. So a study in psychological medicine from earlier this year, it was reported that internationally, interpersonal mistrust, which is kind of a branch of paranoia, thinking from you, out to get you, is present on a pathological level in 37% of participants, which is way higher than pre-pandemic levels. So society at large is in this kind of heightened state of awareness. And further studies prove that this level of paranoia only increases when online content aligns with a viewer's pre-existing beliefs. So there's another journal that I can't pronounce, but I can read, Cogitatio, 2023 here. The actual quote is, higher exposure to online political influencers is linked to more extremist opinions. And if there's anything that we've learned, it's that extremist opinions can break up families, which is what I imagine the opposite of what a therapist wants to do. And look, I'm not trying to say that therapists don't belong on social media at all. What I am saying is that therapists who slip into the realm of influencers, who kind of leverage the toxicity of the internet to increase their online subscriptions or collaborations with businesses, or who monetize their social media, have begun to unethically abuse the power of their credentials. The currency is kind of in hysteria. It's the thing that keeps the clicks coming. So Simeon Brown, the author of Get Rich or Die Trying, Ambition and Deceit in the New Influencer Economy, she has a great explanation of it's called clout rage, or clout through outrage. So finally, my currency is just authenticity. It's the hill I die on. So to be authentic is to have your internal life and your inner self align with the person that you present as in your public life. So sadly, the person that a therapist influencer presents as in their public life is someone who says that they care about the mental health of the public, but often they repeatedly demonstrate that they care more about followers laughing at their memes than the people they're actually trying to advocate for. And helping people recognize and address those incongruities in an age of misinformation is the reason I signed on to this debate.
All right. Thanks,
right.
Sarah. I want to sort of break this down a little bit for myself and for other people who are watching, maybe. Sarah, if let's pick on somebody who's not here, Jordan Peterson. So I was aware of Jordan Peterson back in, I guess, 2016, when he was starting to speak out publicly about, maybe it was around that time, Bill C-16. And at that point, he was just a professor who had a number of lectures on YouTube. But we look at him 6 years later now, and he's working for Daily Wire, and he sort of has a cult of personality that is his main truck and trade. Are you saying that Stephanie is sort of starting to take steps towards becoming the sort of Jordan Peterson like figure? Is that am I understanding that correctly, or is that a fair analogy for what you're saying?
I guess while I would say that they're generally in a similar category, I know they've interacted on Twitter as well. I see him as the extremist case, the way out there, telling people to eat raw meat for their ADHD kind of case. So I see a problem beginning to develop. And again, it's not singular to Stephanie. It's a lot of different therapists I see this happening to. And that's why I kind of wanted to bring this to attention.
I have a question. I guess I'll ask Stephanie. Are you aware of pro-trans therapists or therapists who have public personae on Twitter who publicly talk about how life-saving gender-affirming care is and how kids might commit suicide if they don't have it? Have you seen a lot of therapists or any therapists promoting what we would call trans?
Yeah, well, let me just acknowledge that Sarah has said about 15 different things. And I don't know how we're possibly going to even get to everything that she said in her opening statements. Some of them were general topics to explore. Some of them were direct accusations, and there was a lot in between. But yes, Nina, so that's part of why we're here. Now, by the way, help me come back to the subject that you just asked if I lose track. I want to acknowledge, out of the 15 different things you said, Sarah, that there was definitely some cherry picking going on when you cited specific examples of me retweeting something that said checkmate leftists, and a clip of a piece of one of my podcasts that said something outcomes of leftist medicine, or a moment in an episode where I have said that there are certain advantages that I see to working with conservatives. I do feel that that is cherry picked, and that there are some statements you've made today, and there's some statements you made online that have tried to kind of paint me into a box, and that the whole of my stance is a lot broader than that. As well, Sarah, I would like to say that, you're saying, for example, that in the thread that I'm, picking things that could mean any number of things. It really depends on the context. And I want to say, of course, like, and that is the problem with anyone, whether it's you, Sarah, or a lay person or a fellow therapist or whatever, approaching the topic of a therapist being on social media as if the therapist's activity on social media is therapy, which it's not. And we have to have some boundaries around that. So, you know, there's to say that, I mean, how many times have you seen this? I know I've seen this 1,000 times, right? Where someone makes some brief statement that is reductive and other people criticize it for being reductive. But I've also made long, elaborate, nuanced statements, and then people bother to type into the comments. I miss when Twitter was 280 characters. You know, this is the internet. So I think there's a lot to debate with regard to how much responsibility do I personally have as someone who is using my free time, not my clinical time, to give free information from my own perspective to strangers, not clients, right? This isn't medical advice. About some general observations, I think people reading that also have a responsibility to interpret it correctly. And if people are going to take that list in bad faith or be idiotic about it and say, oh, my daughter didn't tell me where she went last night, and with no other contextual information, she must have gone to Planned Parenthood, well, that's ridiculous. And I'm not going to assume responsibility for that, though, because this is not therapy. It's not medical advice. It's the fucking internet, and everything is reductive because life is so much more complicated than you can even put into words on a screen. So I just wanted to say that to get that off my chest. But back to your question, Nina. Part of how we got to this point where I am a public figure who says things is because it was driving me nuts to see how therapists were talking and acting online. I have heard from so many people who have had the same experience, who have, like I did, either left of groups like, for example, Therapists in Private Practice on Facebook, the largest Facebook group for therapists in the United States, has been taken over completely by woke ideologues. We have things like the Gallup Project, and we have databases of therapists that are totally politically motivated, where they are signing up to provide, saying, I will, no questions asked, write you a gender-affirming letter in one visit. And there are people being harmed for life by these practices. And yes, they are boasting about it on the internet. They're on platforms I'm not looking at. I'm sure there's a lot more content that I'm not looking at. I'm not on TikTok. I see clips of TikTok when people say, save it and share it to Twitter. But there's a lot going on with therapists on social media being very proud of their political stance on the left. And I'm not a leftist anymore, nor am I on the political right. I consider myself moderate, and I'm actually flexible on a lot of issues. I've hosted debates, or not debates, but I've had conversations like this where there's differences of opinion on topics like abortion and religion. I'm very moderate on a lot of things, and I do believe in the value of therapeutic neutrality, and that therapists should stick to our traditional values of being able to serve people from all walks of life. So I have a problem with things like when I hear what's going on at Antioch University, which is just one place where this is happening, where therapists are being trained that they're not supposed to have the skills to work with someone who votes Republican. When I hear things like that, it really bothers me. But yeah, Nina, in a nutshell, there are therapists being very vocal and very self-righteous about their stance in support of so-called gender-affirming care. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. And that's why I do what I do.
Okay. I think I am going to start timing responses. I think I'm just going to suggest like a 3-minute time limit for answering questions, and then I'll interrupt. Is that okay? Is everyone all right with that? Okay. I have a question for Sarah, if it's all right with you, Corinne.
Oh, if it's okay, I'd just like to respond because I have a couple questions as well.
Okay. All right.
We're a verbose crowd.
Okay.
So I guess the main thing that I heard from that is the frustration from this kind of selective bias that you feel is occurring, with me, what you consider to be cherry picking an argument, or people reading only a blip of what they see online about you, and then you kind of grow this anger about it. And to that I say that I think I'd like to get to know you, and that's why I'm here. I would love to get to know the person who has nuance, who has interests, and who has been advocating for a population that you feel has been suffering. Where I get a little tripped up is the person who I've been speaking to online doesn't really seem to be the person who I'm talking to here. And I think that maybe I hear that illuminated in your frustration, that in some ways you can only be a certain person online. And that, kind of is a little bit of what I was talking about, that there is this political element to the internet, that it becomes very divisive and very pigeonholed. And it's hard to speak up for yourself. It's hard to defend yourself. And it's hard to be like, look, I want to be in the middle here, but you got to be on one side or another, which is why I think I felt as empowered as I did, with you engaging with Jordan Peterson and retweeting stuff that says like checkmate leftists, and like, maybe that's not you. And I want to know you. But what I'm saying is there is a version of you on the internet, and that's the version that I saw. And that's the version that I'm kind of relating to in this moment. So that was my little 2 cents there.
Can I respond to that?
Well, let's give Nina a chance here, because I think there's going to be more back and forth, and we want to try to get your positions a little bit more clarified. But yeah, we'll come back, Stephanie.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask Sara the same question. Like, are you aware of therapists that are, pushing an ideology, but maybe one that you more agree with? Like, what I'm wondering is, did you single out Stephanie because she's pushing something that you don't like, while there are all these other therapists that maybe have opinions and ideas that you do like, that are being just as who are as much as in violation of those principles that you're stating, that this is no business of therapists to be doing in public?
So I've been advised to kind of let this story die, but I think it is incredibly pertinent to this moment. There was a therapist earlier this year who I got into a back and forth with on social media. She was a woman of color who said that seeing white clients, and white men in particular, activated her nervous system, to which I said, I don't know what that means, and it seems a little bit delusional. She did not like that very much. This lesson being there that this is not the first time that I've reached out to someone online in a forum like this to kind of push back on things that I see occurring that I think are not helpful to people. And I will do it all across the aisle. It doesn't matter what political ideology somebody has. They could be far on the left, they could be far on the right, they could be nowhere and everywhere. There's no singling out to me. I just see a phenomenon.
But have you been then reaching out, as you say, to these very pro-affirmation therapists? Because I believe there are quite a few of them. Like, are they just not on your radar?
They are not, and so far not on my feed. If I see it happen, I'll go for it. But
okay,
maybe it's my algorithm or something. I don't know.
All right, you've answered my question.
May I?
Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead. Actually, let me throw a question at you as part of your response here. But
I've got a buildup of so many things already, Corinna.
I totally understand. I'm gonna hopefully maybe give you something to tee off with, because I'm reading some of this too. When I think about, so I have knowledge that maybe Sara doesn't have, but I think Stephanie, you do, that there actually are a lot of social media networks that are set up that are meant to attract young people to start various sorts of transition activities behind their parents' backs. There are ways that teenage boys can get estrogen pretty easily. I know that there are ways for teenage girls to get it's not as easy, but there are ways for teenage girls to get testosterone. And that there's also adults who are willing to act as surrogate parents to basically give permission to young people to get access to some of these resources like Planned Parenthood. To me, telling parents, hey, this stuff is going on, and these are some things that you would notice if you're a parent, doesn't strike me as a form of paranoia. It does seem like something that parents might not know, especially I would say to parents, if your kids have a lot of friends who identify as trans, that's maybe the first red flag. And then on top of that, if you start seeing these some of these other behaviors. But Stephanie, it sounded like one of the things that you really took umbrage to is being described as paranoid. So I don't know if this is one of those 15 things that you want to talk about, but can you maybe air this out a little bit to talk about, like, maybe there's a point where you think this is actually pretty rational, but you know, here's what paranoia would look like. I'm not being paranoid. Can you address it that way? Maybe, I don't know.
Can I just respectfully shelve that, because I've got like a buildup of all of these things that I've heard and haven't had a chance to respond to. And I don't really feel like the burden of proof is on me to demonstrate that I'm not paranoid, because Sara has used an extreme word to describe me. I feel like the burden of proof is on her. You know, in my opinion, if even one adolescent girl is ever behind her parents' backs injecting herself with chemicals that will alter the course of her entire future, then providing information to parents is worth it. That's my view, in a nutshell. But I on my list of things to respond to, Sara, I appreciated the olive branch you extended a few minutes ago when you said you would like to get to know me and that you don't see this version of me on the internet. And where I'm going to push back is how much of that is your responsibility as someone who's using the internet, because I have a long form interview podcast. I have deep conversations, very nuanced, hour and a half long, you know, and there's 75 of them now. I wouldn't expect anyone but my most ardent fans to listen to all 75 hour and a half long conversations. But the point is that if someone really is curious to get to know who is Stephanie Winn and what does she think about various things, they could find out. Now, to whatever degree your interaction with me is more shallow than that, I don't blame you. We all have our only so much time and whatever our given priorities are. What I take issue with is that it seems that you're ascribing responsibility to me for the heuristics in your mind, because we're all interacting through heuristics on the internet all the time. And what you're saying is that you've taken in a glimpse here, a glimpse there, devoid of context, devoid of tone, and you've made certain inferences about me. I think where we disagree is how much responsibility I personally have for the inferences that you've made about me, or that a given, let's say, other person on the internet who you view yourself as standing up for in this conversation might have about me, compared to how much I personally have made the choice to let go of assuming that much responsibility for that, and to understand that I cannot control other people's perceptions or the assumptions they're going to make about me. And in order to have the dialogues that are most interesting to me, I just have to let go of trying to explain myself fully in every single context. And I will, you know, I did admittedly smirk a little bit earlier when you said I die on the hill of authenticity, because I just found it very ironic that to you, authenticity is this core value that you claim to champion. And yet there seems to be a great sensitivity in you. One could say perhaps a hypervigilance in you, Sara, to what you see as inauthenticity or performativeness that I think you're projecting onto me. And clearly it's in the title of your book. There's a lot of interest here in the performativeness of therapists. And so I think you're making some inferences that, in my view, aren't necessarily accurate or even warranted as to my authenticity, because that is actually a core value that I share. Can I just finish my thought? It's a core value that I share. And a large part of the reason that I do what I do is because I decided that that was more important, that being a whole person was more important than meeting someone's standard of how a professional should behave in all contexts.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, Sara, go ahead. One of the things that I want to be careful of is we want to be able to have more than just accusations going back and forth. Not saying that that's all this is, because everybody's sort of speaking what's on their mind, but I want to make sure that we have opportunities to come back and try to understand the more fundamental issue that kicked us off, which Stephanie was one of the reasons why I brought that question back, is because it was kind of core to it. So Sara, please please respond, and then at minimum, we're going to go to a question that we got in chat. But
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. I do have a question for Stephanie, but I can table that if you want me to just put it aside.
You can direct it towards us, and we'll ask her.
Okay. It was kind of led in with some of the other things she was talking about not necessarily assuming responsibility for the things you put out online. It's kind of on the people seeing it to have that responsibility to see what you're doing is their own projection, or whatever therapy word you would use. But for me, that was kind of part of my problem in the first place, was the lack of responsibility coming from a therapist to say, I'm just going to put out what I'm going to put out online, and you can take it and shove it, or you can look at it and think that I'm amazing or terrible, and you don't know the real me. But I think that as a therapist, you have a certain responsibility to the people that you're communicating with to be like, does this help someone's mental well-being? If you're not a therapist, you don't care. You're an influencer. You're just like getting out there and saying your piece and doing your thing. But I think that having the letters after your name, having clients, having patients, kind of brings in another element to this, which is the question I wanted to ask. So this is something that actually I was kind of curious about, which is like, I see you taking the gender transitioning kids stuff, parent advocacy, very seriously. That being said, I see some behavior online that also kind of contradicts with that. So I'm very curious about the memes that you write and post and stuff, and like what the meaning of those memes are to you, why you post them, and what, I guess from my perspective, what image you think that would present to your followers, and what do you think they would get from that? I mean, technically, I imagine the answer is like whatever they want to get from it, but I genuinely am curious.
May I respond now?
Just give me a moment to absorb this, because she said I thought the question was going to be, who is responsible for offense online, and are therapists extra responsible? Are therapists online more responsible than just normal civilians? Do they carry greater responsibility, and is everything a therapist says supposed to be therapeutic? And that was all questions that I heard before it got to the real question. So, I mean, those are interesting topics for discussion, but I guess the question that she wanted to ask was, what are you trying to achieve with those memes?
Okay. So again, there's like 10 different things, right?
Yeah.
And Sarah, the way that you rephrased what I said didn't feel entirely accurate. Like it, and I'm not sure if that was deliberate, but it's not that. I mean, you said this is my problem in the first place, the lack of responsibility coming from a therapist. So I didn't say that I don't have responsibility. I'm somebody with a very strong sense of responsibility, if you know me. But it's how much responsibility should I assume for how people interpret tiny little glimpses of things on the internet. That is something that I have very little control over. And if I were to worry so much about that, given how much I've already learned about people's tendency to jump to conclusions and project and how human emotions and thought distortions, I would never get anything done. I could not be somebody who's in the public forum and worry or feel like it's fully my responsibility to control the impact of how people choose to interpret things. So my position is simply, it's not that I don't have responsibility. It's that in a given moment, if someone's choosing to assume that they know who I am or what my stance is on other things based on 5 or 10 or even 500 words, there's only so much responsibility I can take. Now, you raise the question, does this help someone with their mental well-being? And then Nina sort of paraphrased that as a slightly different question, is everything a therapist does supposed to be therapeutic? So I appreciate your reframe of it, Nina, because I would say no, not everything a therapist does outside of the context of therapy do they owe the world to be therapeutic. So I made this distinction earlier on. I'm a therapist with my clients with whom I have contracts. I'm not a therapist on the internet. On the internet, I'm a person who is a therapist and who draws on that as well as my other human experiences to say what I want to say, and who understands that there are, yes, some risks involved in that, including how that might affect perceptions of therapists or their perceptions of me. But does this help someone with their mental well-being? First of all, I don't think that I have a responsibility in this regard to have that be the number one behind every single thing I do in terms of personal expression online. I think that is too rigid a box to fit me in. Does that mean I lack responsibility? Marking Sarah, and but you so but in terms of risks and benefits, and Sarah, this is where you and I come from really different places, because I understand you've studied psychology and you're very interested in my field, but you don't work in my field. And I think it's easy as someone who I don't know you, but you seem to view yourself like a critic. Like, I don't know, there are movie critics who have never made a film in their life and never acted in a film. Can I finish? But who view it as their job to be a critic of movies. And I don't know if that's how you view yourself, Sarah, as somebody who contributes to society by being a critic of the field of therapy. But as someone who's in it, I understand that we take risks all the time. And I have great conversations with other therapists about the risks and benefits of any particular way of behaving, whether in therapy or in life. And for me, it's not that I view myself as capable of never participating in harm. I think that's a luxury belief. I think it's very Western, very modern, this idea that there is a way to live that doesn't harm anybody ever. I think that we take chances in life, and there's always a mixture of harm and benefit. And so when I'm looking at that benefit in my life or when I'm looking at that balance in my life and my decision making between risks and benefits, are the things you're pointing out, Sarah, possible risks? Yes, that someone could be offended, that someone could be alarmed or experience anxiety or anger in response to something I say, that something I say could make them think about something that causes distress, or even that something I say makes them think less of my field. That is a possibility. However, to me, the things I say hold value because of the benefits they confer relative to those risks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question from chat that is from Anita Bartholomew. And Anita, I apologize because I don't completely understand your question, but I'm going to read it and I'm going to try to interpret it here. And it's for Sarah. Is Sarah claiming that mental health expertise should not be presented by mental health professionals whose opinions will be shaped in large part by their experience in their profession? I'm gonna try to interpret. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Sarah. It doesn't make complete sense.
It does. I think I get it. The core of what's being said. Yeah.
Could you restate it then so that I understand it? Because I don't quite get it.
I think that this person is asking if I believe that mental health, people work in mental health, shouldn't be outrightly talking about topics in mental health online, with operating under the assumption that a topic in mental health is this rapid onset transitioning. To that, I would kind of respond that I don't necessarily know if it's a topic in mental health. I'm aware that gender dysphoria is a topic in mental health, but I'm also aware that transgender issues, which, look, I'm not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. This is not what I'm here for. I'm here to talk about authenticity, and I'm here to talk about therapeutic identity.
Yeah.
But I am aware that, there are different strokes for different folks. It's okay to be only one thing. It's okay to be a geneticist. It's okay to be a doctor. It's okay to be a gender specialist who's went to medical school. And I think that there's a difference between advocating for people who are experiencing dysphoria and the kind of stuff, which again, I just wanted to say, let's kind of, in response to what Stephanie said, let's kind of just slow down a little bit, because I think we're getting a little heated. I'm seeing that she's getting maybe a little bit defensive.
Hang on for a second, because it doesn't benefit anybody to make those types of observations, Sarah. But let me go back to something that you said, because I think that there's a lot to mine out here, because you talked about authenticity. And I don't know if you've listened to Heterodorx at all, but we talk about authenticity pretty often. My take is that authenticity is not something that you can achieve by trying to become authentic. Authenticity is something that you can only achieve by not going after it anymore. Because the more that you front and the more that you present, the less authentic you are, even if that's the most important thing to you. So you've used authenticity a few times, but I don't really understand what you mean by it. That's what I mean by it, is that you're not fronting anything anymore. But tell us what you mean by authenticity, and then if you don't mind, why it matters in this particular conversation.
Sure. I totally agree with you. I think that authenticity happens when you stop trying to be your true self. I'm always kind of reticent of people who are like, I'm just being me, I don't care what other people say. It's like, you're being something, you're trying to be yourself, but who knows what that actually means. Authenticity, I think I mentioned this in my book. It's like, it's not a static thing. It's a thing that is created along life. And it's something that kind of develops. It's not something that you just have and then you got it and then you're locked in. I think that the role of a therapist in being authentic is, let me think about this for a second, because I think it's an interesting question. I was thinking about it in the context of the internet, given their authenticity online, matching what's going on internally from what's going on externally. And my general critique is that when I see people engaging in internet culture, this kind of like hyperbolic, overwhelming, vitriolic sometimes responses, I think to me, that indicates that there is something going on an unspoken level, on the level of groupthink. And that the internet has a certain culture that I think is antithetical to authenticity in many ways. And I think that, like, Stephanie, I see you look there. I think that, like, there's this very interesting kind of exploration that we need to do of, I keep thinking about it, my brain keeps going back to, Stephanie's role of what is a therapist, what is their role on the internet, what versus their role in a therapy room. Does a therapist have to be a therapist all the time? And the general response there is like, no, but they should be authentic to the role that they've chosen to be in. Oh, Nina, I saw that.
Wait a second. How do you be authentic to a role?
You can. That is the role of the performance therapist. You do. Performance and authenticity are not mutually exclusive.
Really?
That's my hot take. Oh, yep. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both. Yep.
All right, Stephanie, let's talk about authenticity for a second. I'm curious your take on authenticity and whether while performing a role you can also be authentic, and just generally your views on authenticity and how it affects your work and your interactions on social media.
I'm so confused because I don't think I understand a thing Sara has said yet. I am really trying to understand what Sara's saying. And to me, it seems like it keeps shifting around. So let me just add up the pieces that aren't adding up to me, because I want you to clarify this for me, Sara. First of all, I'm trying to understand, are you accusing me of being inauthentic? And if so, what is your evidence that I lack authenticity? That's part of what I'm trying to clarify here. Two, I'm trying to understand what is your response to Anita's question, because I thought it was a really good question, and it's something I'm trying to understand your position on as well. And I know you said something in response to it, but I didn't really get your answer to her question, which is, are you saying that mental health professionals should not convey their expertise? And then a third thing that's not adding up to me is that you say that the hill you're willing to die on is authenticity. You say what you're all about is authenticity and therapeutic identity. You say you're not going to touch, I wasn't sure what it was, the trans or gender dysphoria, you're not going to touch something in that ballpark with a 10-foot pole. However, if you're saying that that's not yours to comment on, that's not something that you're willing to go near, then why do you think it's your place to critique me as somebody who does have expertise in that, as somebody who, for me, it is, you could say, a very authentic expression of my therapeutic identity to share what I've learned with the world on that topic. When I've shared something on that topic, and you have said that it's dangerous and insanely paranoid to do so, I do think that you are touching that issue with a 10-foot pole. I do think that you're saying that you have a right to have an opinion on that. So those are all not adding up to me.
May I?
Yeah, I think that's a fairly phrased set of questions there.
Yeah. So I think the most interesting thing that you just said was the comment that you had about, I can't remember the exact way that you phrased it, but it was the idea that a therapist does not, the Anita's question, which is, a therapist does not necessarily like, I have a half-formed thought I'm trying to work out, so bear with me for a second.
Would it help this question?
Well, it was about medical expertise. This is what I'm trying to work out, is that like the expertise issue to me is an issue of being in the mental health profession and seeing, I don't see the trans issue as necessarily a thing that a mental health professional inherently comments on unless it happens in their vicinity. And I know you were talking about the Facebook forums and stuff like that. Like you see this happening, which like I'm totally willing to hear out. And I certainly have heard out advocates online who have said stuff about transgender issues, who have phrased things really eloquently, like kids are suffering, we really need to help them. My qualm is when I wrote a note on this, is that like, there is some, I guess, issue with the authenticity that I see from your perspective in what you have been telling me versus what I'm seeing online. So in your bio, I think you mentioned something about unfortunately, you can't work with gender nonconforming people anymore because to a certain element, you don't believe in neutrality. But then I think a few minutes later,
she never talked about working with gender nonconforming people. She knows a lot of gender
I wrote it down.
nonconforming people. Trans is not the same as gender nonconforming.
All right.
Gender questioning.
Well, to clear, yes. Yeah.
Along the lines of being unable to work with this population, which I'm sure you can look at the bio and find the exact wording. But I think that to me was a little bit strange that she says this and then, she kind of says that there's no such thing as neutrality, and then she thinks that therapists should be neutral. And this is exactly what I was talking about, is this issue of what do you believe as a therapist and how do you portray that online? And
yeah, Sarah, do you mind if I ask you a question here? Because
yeah, go ahead.
Stephanie brought up something earlier that I thought resonated with me at least. She asked if your main thing is just to be a critic of therapy, which if it is, I got to tell you, like minutes before we started this live stream, I quote tweeted Nancy Kelly, former head of Stonewall UK, and I said, hey, you need to really start thinking about like why trans acceptance is down in the UK and think about what your role is in this. So if there's like part of what you do that's like, hey, I feel like I should be like keeping people on the track. And that's part of what I do, is I can like point at people and say, hey, you should be paying attention to this. Like, is that sort of what your role is too? Is you see people who have a public platform and you think, hey, I know something about what makes good therapy or what's a good trait in therapists, and I see you going outside of the line here. Is that part of what's happening?
The only thing I can do is rely on my experience and my knowledge. And the knowledge that I have is a foundation in psychoanalysis. So I have certain beliefs that admittedly I know that CBT therapists just don't have, abstinence, neutrality, and believing, the unconscious and stuff like that. So I fully admit that I come from a certain perspective, and I'm not trying to wag my finger at those who just don't believe what I believe. What I am trying to do is I'm trying to bring to light the issue of therapists online who I see as kind of acting in a role that contradicts the role of healing. And I think I do that in whatever way possible. I mean, I do it offline, I do it online, I do it in interviews. I've been trying to do it as much as possible because I think it's a huge issue.
So
I feel like there was a question for me a few minutes ago, and I'm still trying to understand.
Well, I've got a bunch of questions. Sorry,
but I felt like Sarah was asking me a question, and I was trying to like get clear on what exactly she was asking me so I could answer it. But I feel like I'm getting lost now.
Okay. And
I mean, there's something about neutrality. I know Sarah wanted me to clarify my thoughts on neutrality. Also, there's the meme question that's left hanging.
Yeah, we're all over the place here.
So Sarah, how do you know whether someone's authentic?
That's a good question. Authenticity is co-created. So authenticity, at least in the bounds of a therapeutic relationship, two people are able to delineate in their environment, in the context that they're in, because again, it is also context dependent, whether or not the two are experiencing a moment of connection that then leads to both feeling like, okay, my inner self is now aligned with my exterior self. You can pull out any theory you want about it. Winnicott's true self, false self, Karen Horney's idealized image, and their quote unquote real self. And I mean, all kinds of Freud stuff as well, which I know people raise an eyebrow at, so I'll hesitate to bring up. But I think that in a way, authenticity is determined by the people who are there, who are in the room, who are experiencing it together. It's not just something you can be like, I'm being authentic on my own, because authenticity is something that someone else also sees and internalizes.
So
it's a complicated question.
How can you judge anyone's authenticity from stuff online?
That is very difficult to do. I think that the internet in and of itself is a place where inauthenticity exists. You really can't be the authentic version of, this is kind of feeds into the larger argument, it can't really be the authentic version of yourself when you're trying to be an influencer, because an influencer is someone who's seeking out to gain a certain kind of maybe profit, gain followers, gain a following, and the things that you need to do there.
There it is.
Is everyone who uses the internet trying to be an influencer? Like, can anyone
Certainly
be
not.
authentic on the okay, can anyone be authentic on the internet?
Well,
and
well,
how do
people
you
can
know?
try. People can certainly try to be authentic on the internet.
For listeners and viewers, if you think Nina and I are authentic, please like and subscribe.
I certainly think you guys are. Also,
we gotta
here.
find
I like
a way
you.
to monetize this authenticity. Okay, Stephanie, you have stuff to say. So.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to track down Sarah's position so that I know what I'm responding to. I'm trying to understand her question so I know what I'm answering. I'm getting lost in the process. But I did kind of snap my fingers when I think I heard you articulate, Sarah, that you hold a belief that a person cannot simultaneously be authentic and be what could be termed a social media influencer, which is itself how do we define who is and isn't, is it when you hit the 5,000 follower mark or the 50,000 or, but let's say for the purposes that, my stats, right? I have 32,000 Twitter followers, 10,000 plus audio downloads, that let's say I qualify as an influencer. Are you saying that those of us who are, influencers cannot, by way of being like that's mutually exclusive, that they can't be authentic? And if so, what's your rationale behind that belief? Because it seems like that's kind of part of the underlying logic behind the accusation, that the accusation you haven't made fully explicit, but it seems like there's an accusation that I am lacking authenticity, according to you.
Sarah, if I want to just paraphrase that if I can, so I can understand it, and Stephanie, you correct me, but my sense from you, Sarah, is that you're saying that when you start building up this big public profile, and that, well, along with that, sometimes you get the memes. You had a number of things that you saw Stephanie retweet or has been pulled out of episodes, and you think, well, now you've got this big public persona that precedes any sort of relationship that you can have in therapy, and not only precedes any relationship that you can have with any new clients, but is within full vision of all of your existing clients. If you have this big public persona on the internet, how can you ever have an authentic relationship privately with your clients? Is that what you're saying?
From my perspective?
Yeah.
Well, as Stephanie was talking, I had an idea kind of come back to me that I was thinking about before, and it congealed into a, kind of a more reasonable form, which is, can you be authentic as an influencer online? And I think that harkens back to our conversation at the beginning of the talk, which is that I don't really know her. The only thing I know is her online presence, and her online presence is different than the presence outside of the internet, given she's, for whatever reason, someone would want to portray the values that they portray on social media. Of course, character limit, lack of nuance, all that stuff is very relevant. But I think inherently, if you judge yourself to be an authentic person, which again, context dependent, you can't be authentic all the time everywhere. It's just way too hard to navigate all that stuff. But when you are online acting in a different way than you're acting in real life, acting in a more provocative way, acting in a more satirical way, in a sillier way. And she also said earlier that it was kind of better for her clients if she has that kind of outlet for intellectual and creative stimulation, or else she would, I think the exact quote was, make therapy about her. And I think that's kind of an interesting point too, is like, I don't really know Stephanie that well, but I do know that she has an image that she presents online. She has a reason for the image that she presents online. And so I'm not quite sure if that is the authentic her, or if the person on the podcast is the authentic her, or the person who sits there with patients is the authentic her. You know, it could be one of the above, all of the same. But this is, again, it's not specific to her, to just broad strokes here. I think this is the issue that I have with all the influencer therapy types, is that you really, sorry?
Could I ask you though, because this is your field, and setting Stephanie aside for a second, is there somebody who you look up to in the therapy field who is an influencer that you think, hey, more of the people in the field should be more like this person? Who's your exemplar?
Edward Perrin comes to mind. I really like him. He's a cool dude. He's the former military. He's a sweet guy, and he, posts just grilling on the weekends, and comments to make, and things to advise men on and going into therapy. And he has his niche, but I think that he's generally a very kind of non-provocative, middle of the road, genuine dude. And I think that that's something to look up to.
Hang on a sec. So do you think that the only reason somebody's content, so to speak, or thoughts that they're sharing could be provocative is just because they get off on provoking people, or that drives numbers? Do you think that there are any times somebody might say stuff that's provocative where it's not because they're narcissistic, where actually they might occasionally need to say things that are true that upset people?
I would certainly not go so far as to say narcissistic, but I think you're going to get tired of me saying this word. It's dependent on the context again. I mean, you really have to look at someone on the whole and what they're providing, what they're advertising, what they're...
Do you look at someone on the whole before you make statements about them online and criticize them?
I certainly try to.
Okay, but did you listen to any of Stephanie's podcasts?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you find like there was a disconnect between the way she seemed on her podcasts and the way she was tweeting?
Yeah, I think I did. I didn't see as many, or hear rather in a podcast, I didn't hear really as many what I'll call buzzwords. So accusations, that just for frame of reference, that she's made against me. So manipulative or abusive language. I didn't hear these kind of inflammatory words when she's having conversations with other, recently I think she did a podcast on being a step parent. And I really liked that one, it was good. But like that, to me, there were no real inflammatory kind of inciting remarks. The internet really brings out something in people that I think is just not who they are, not who they are outside the internet.
You're not talking about the internet, you're talking about social media, because podcasts are the internet.
Yeah.
And you're really talking about Twitter. You're saying that like...
Particularly Twitter, yes.
She's like this on Twitter, and the way she seems on Twitter does not seem to be right.
Which, again, I could be totally wrong.
Or you could be talking about Twitter.
Well, that too.
I mean, I think you know that. I think you're pretty aware of...
Well, also it is as well Instagram, TikTok, any real, Facebook also,
What's TikTok?
So social media. We've known for years that social media polarizes. And I like the term polarizing because in graphics, when you polarize a graphic, it becomes black and white. So there is not nuance. So this is known. This has been known for years. So if you take a nuanced human being and then expect them to somehow express themselves on Twitter in this three-dimensional way that can be done a little bit, can be hinted at in other media, but that's a pretty high and strange expectation that someone would somehow use Twitter that way when it really, I don't think can be done. I don't think there is. It's like vanishingly rare. Like that's just not how Twitter is.
I hold out hope for a different world, for a world that is more moderate and more reasonable and can see nuance in things where they're otherwise been polarized. I use the word polarized in my opening statement for just how the internet culture is. It just is so divisive, and it's one of the things I hate to see. I mean, maybe I've been called an idealist before, but I certainly think that there's something different we could be doing.
Yeah, but the thing is that Twitter isn't the world. I mean, it sounds like you.
I'm not saying it is. I
didn't witness this drama, but it sounds like there was like a conflict on Twitter, which Twitter is built for. Twitter thrives on conflict, and it sounds like you had one. And
I was starting to get the feeling that 3 people in here may not necessarily be on board with what I'm saying, and there's one person in here who still wants to hear me out. But
no, I want to
hear,
but I'm like, it's like
I don't think it's like that, Sarah.
Okay.
This is I mean, it just sounds, honestly, it sounds like, I'm gonna be real honest here. I'm gonna be authentic.
Please do.
I'm gonna break from my role. It sounds like a pretty.
I don't appreciate the mocking tone, though.
Pretty,
we could have done without the mocking.
No, she's not. This is
pretty
Nina.
Typical thing that happens on Twitter, and I think Stephanie, I think that part of being a public truth teller, because I do think you're telling the truth, is that people are not going to like it.
We'll see that this is the issue. Then I think Corinna also said that she sees a real issue with the trans kids, and you're saying that Stephanie's a truth teller, and this is, I mean, there is clearly a side being taken. We can't deny that here.
Well,
I would like all of us to be.
You're also a truth teller. You're not wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. You're telling the truth too.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Earlier when I was like, hey, I'm a critic too, that was partly to let you know that I'm, like I get that perspective.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
We're all critics here, and this is what happens on Twitter.
And the other thing too is I think we're also kind of getting hung up on the Twitter part. I'm not necessarily talking about Twitter. I'm talking about the entire social media, the entire internet culture.
But
okay, wait. So
is this fight started? I mean, to be fair, Sarah, you did start this fight because you made accusations of me. I didn't start this by saying Sara London is a this and that. You started this by saying that I was being insanely paranoid. Those were your words. And then you've leveraged several other accusations against me. Some of them direct, some of them more implied. I'm trying to elucidate what they are so I can respond to those accusations. So to be fair, you did make those accusations of me based on a projection that you have of me that you formed by looking at little bits of what I put out on social media. And then you say this isn't about Twitter, but it obviously is. And I think that Nina's making a fair point here. And I think where we disagree is how much I am responsible versus how much you are responsible for the picture that you formed in your mind of who I am as a person based on little bits of information that you took in.
But Stephanie, people are going to do that. Everyone's when you're in public, that's going to happen all the time. And when somebody says something awful to you on Twitter, you can't respond every time they do that.
I'm trying not to.
Mind if I tap in? I think you said something interesting, which is the not being responsible for a person's viewing you on the internet. And
I said we disagree over how much I'm responsible versus how much you're responsible for the image you have of me in your mind.
But I certainly also think that we've been dancing around this issue too. It was a questions that have come up earlier about what is a mental health professional's responsibility for what they put out online. And I am of the belief that if you are a mental health professional dedicating yourself to the mental health and well-being of people, you have a different level of responsibility than a layman. I mean, you can't just go around provoking people and prodding people. And I think that there is this level of responsibility that comes with the code of ethics of being a mental health professional, which the social work code of ethics, I think, says a little more explicitly about like online statements. But like in general, to me, this is a personal opinion too. I mean, it's, you know.
Well, we don't disagree that a therapist has some degree of responsibility in terms of how they conduct themselves in their public affairs. We don't disagree with that as a baseline. But where we disagree is how much responsibility, in what circumstances, and specifically, where are you taking issue with the choices that I have made? And the choices I've made are not for everyone. And that's why I laid it out at the beginning the way I did, that I was not known beyond a certain, beyond a few hundred people for the first 8 years of my career, until I decided that it was important to join the intellectual community of people conversing about these matters. And I did, as has been referenced, make the point that given the nature of who I am, and the same thing isn't going to be true for the next person, but given the nature of who I am and my need for expression, I see the benefits outweighing the risks of me having an outlet, right? So that I'm channeling that energy. And yes, I realize that shapes who my clientele are and what might transpire from there. But as for my memes, which have not been discussed yet, I will say I have clients that follow me on social media. I never encourage that. I don't interact with clients online, but I also can't stop them. And there are people who specifically seek me out because they like what I have to say online. That's their choice. And then I have had them come to therapy, and I've had them come to consulting meetings, which are two different services I provide, and say, I loved your memes. Right. So the intention behind my memes, to respond to that briefly, is A, to provide some comic relief to people who are in the same boat as me, B, to highlight the absurdity of things, and C, to wake people up. And I did write a piece on this. I'm not sure if you saw it, but basically an analogy I used is that I feel like the people who support gender ideology have basically erected temples around us and told us that we are on their sacred ground and that we must bend down and worship, and that we must follow their rules and treat everything with the utmost seriousness with regard to worshiping their gods of gender. And I am treating that with irreverence because I believe it deserves to be treated with irreverence, because paradoxically, I actually hold reverence for what is truly meaningful in life. And I believe that anyone who is listening in good faith, truly curious what I have to say, who gets to know me as a person, who likes my approach to therapy and my approach to life and my approach to being a public persona, will see that I place a great value on what is good, true, right, what is natural, what is beautiful, what is sacred, what is innocent, what deserves to be protected. And so in a context in which a bunch of ideologues have tried to capture our culture and make us worship their gods, I am treating that with irreverence, in the spirit of reverence for everything that I actually believe in. And I've had many people tell me that they were moved by my memes, that they were relieved by them, that they actually feel like they're going to make a difference. I have had some very prominent intellectual thinkers, believe it or not, reach out to me saying that I think this is key to helping wake people up. So that's a vehicle of expression for me. Is it a wise choice for every therapist? Certainly not. It's just my unique path. And I am somehow walking this balance of maintaining my position as a therapist while recognizing that my public works definitely shift the kind of people who will seek me out. And that's okay.
Do you mind if I respond?
Please.
Yeah, actually, but before you do, let me notice that we've been speaking for 75 minutes. I want to add a little bit of structure here to take us out, because I think we've covered a lot of this. So what I want to do is, first of all, Sarah, give you a chance to respond. Nina, I don't know if you have any other questions. There are a couple of questions in the chat, but I think we've sort of covered those as part of the discussion. So what I'd like to maybe recommend here is let Sarah reply to Stephanie here. Let Stephanie answer back, and because Stephanie got the first word in on setting the stage, maybe let Sarah have the last word, and then we can part ways amicably. How does that sound for the structure for the rest of this? All right.
Sounds
now,
good.
Now, Nina and I still might jump in and ask questions.
Well, I have to admit, I'm not feeling fully confident that like Sara won't say something in her last words that then like leave something hanging for me. So I just need to vocalize that.
I totally get that.
We
And
have to sit with the discomfort, Stephanie. We have to, we can't control other people.
I can see another meme in the forming here. Sara, sorry, I know that took a minute to lay that down. Hopefully I didn't knock your train of thought off too far. But go ahead.
You're fine. I was taking notes.
All right.
So I guess the first thing is just to visit the conversation of memes. I think Nina's talk about, kind of Twitter being this own realm, this own kind of weird place. I think that also kind of feeds into the whole idea of memes. And that's why I was pushing back on it a little bit, is because like, I really I think that we need to be a little more particular about how we're saying, okay, well, people love my memes and my patients love my memes, intellectuals love my memes. Well, it's a small subset on Twitter of people who are doing this. I think we need to like kind of keep that in mind a little bit as well. The other thing that I was going to say is, I think the thing that really has struck me the most is that I'm hearing two different arguments. I'm not quite sure which one you're trying to put forth here. But at first I heard that social media was an outlet for your intellectual creativity, so that it wouldn't impact. But in that kind of response that you just gave, you said, well, my patients love it and it's great, it's amazing. And I've heard a couple of these dichotomies, I'll say, a few times. And this is one that I think just was a little more prevalent to me. So I wanted you to kind of explain where you fall on that. It was a little bit confusing to me. Is social media kind of a for you thing, so it doesn't actually go into the therapy room? Or you can't control that it, comes like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't control what your patients might see of you. And so if the therapy room has a different, kind of sphere and it goes into Twitter, sometimes your patients see you, like they love it. And that's why you continue. I don't know.
Can I respond? That's a question for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, it's both. I mean, when you say it like that, it sounds really confusing, but it's more like that. If I had my temperament and my gifts and my drives and did not have some kind of creative outlet, there would arguably be a risk that some of my own need for creative expression and self-actualization would play out in my countertransference toward my patients as somebody who's not a public figure. That's a risk. It's a hypothetical. It's just something I'm explaining from a place of self-knowledge. Is there a way to test it? No, I took this path, not that path, right? So, but also my patients love it. Yes, some patients, specifically those, and out of the people I see, there are people who have no idea that I'm a public figure, and there are people who found me because they listened to my podcast. I mean, there's a range in there. And out of the people who found me because they listen to my podcast, some of them follow me anonymously on Twitter. I don't interact with them. I don't encourage patients to follow me on Twitter. That's not a thing I would do. But I'm not going to stop people from knowing who I am and what I have to say as a public figure and deciding based on that they would actually like to work with me. And then coming and saying, and it's in the same context that they often come and say, oh, did you see that thing in the news? Because I know we're reading the same news because we're in the same online spheres. And if they're ROGD parents, which is a lot of the people I work with, then yes, we're tracking the same news stories and the implications those stories have for their family. So yeah, I mean, the fact that I share some online cultural spaces with people who also seek me out for therapy, and those people come and say, I loved your memes one week, just like when the previous week they said, did you see the news about the Tavistock closing? To me, those are not mutually exclusive. It just depends on the patient. Am I taking a risk? Yes, there's always the risk that someone who is seeing me for therapy, where it's just therapy and they don't know me as a public figure, at any moment they could come across my public work. My hope would be that I've established enough rapport with them that they could come to me and tell me how they feel discovering that, and it could be a really valuable relational moment. There's also the possibility they could fire me and never talk to me again. There's all sorts of possibilities there. It's just, for me, again, like I say, I think it's a luxury belief to think that there's a way of living in this world that is good and never does any harm and only does pure good. And for me, it's all about, I know you're giving me a funny look, but I genuinely think that this pervades American culture. This and maybe it's not part of you and your makeup, Sarah, but I think that for me, it's about weighing the risks and benefits and just making the choices that I think will do the most good in the balance of my life, given the values that I hold and the things that I care about.
Stephanie,
4 seconds left. Well done.
Stephanie, you did get a chance to answer that question. As we talked about before, let's give you a chance to put together your closing thoughts here and your positions. Sarah, as we said, she's going to get the last chance to have the stage here, and then we'll say goodbye to each other, and then yell about this on Twitter, Nina.
Yeah. Well, boy, I have a whole speech I want to give once their debate's over. I'm going to be like Jerry Springer after the Jerry Springer show.
No.
He has his closing thoughts.
Okay. All right. You can do that, Jerry. So Stephanie, go ahead. This is your chance.
I'm making my closing statements now. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that we've really clarified anything. I mean, my hope going into this was for Sarah to either apologize and retract her initial statement that started this whole thing, or to defend it. You know, the idea that it was insanely paranoid of me to provide this information. And I feel like we kept like shifting the goalposts, and I'm not sure what questions we really answered here. But I think we've talked about some interesting things. For Sarah, authenticity is very important. And it seems like there has been not the direct accusation, but it seems like the implied accusation that I'm somehow lacking in authenticity. And I do, to be honest, find that ironic, given that I think who I am as a person, I've quite integrated a lot of myself, and that I feel like I'm very genuine with my clients, and I feel like I'm very genuine on my podcast. And as I've said several times now, there's only so much responsibility I personally feel I can or should take for the image that people form of me in their minds based on things that they see on Twitter. And again, for me, it all just comes down to risks. I've made choices that I can't walk back. The moment I became a public figure, there's just no going back. There's only going forward. The opinion based on things that she's said, that to have some level of micro celebrity like I have, to have a podcast, for example, which one monetizes, or a Twitter account, which one gains followers and influence from, that necessarily means some kind of lack of authenticity or some kind of sinister intention that is at odds with healing or being a good therapist. And again, for me, my path is not for everyone. It's a path for me. And I think that we can have sort of the Platonic ideal in our minds of any given archetype. Sarah perhaps has the Platonic ideal in her mind of what the ideal therapist is, and views herself as a critic whose job it is to provide feedback to the therapist community from the outside to try to nudge everyone closer to that Platonic ideal. I think a lot of people, though, and I'm not sure if Sarah's in this category, but I do think a lot of people struggle to integrate the concept of a therapist as a therapist with a therapist as a human being. And for me, that is something that I walk without shame. And I feel personally good about the choices that I make to reveal a certain degree of my humanity and my vulnerability and my honest opinions on things. And honestly, I think while I'm not for everyone, it does make a lot of people trust me more. And I've received a lot of feedback that people appreciate my using the power of my credentials to take a stance on an issue that's really hurting a lot of people.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Did that raise any questions, Nina?
No, I'm still waiting for my Jerry Springer moment. So
all right.
Let's hear Sarah.
I was hoping it was like a... Yeah, anyway. Sarah, go ahead.
I'm looking forward to the Jerry Springer moment.
Yeah, I am too.
I've been on Jerry Springer, just FYI.
Oh, okay.
I'm the only one of these people has been on Jerry
as a
Springer.
cannibal.
All right. Anyway, Go ahead, Sarah.
It's true.
So I guess just to kind of solidify my argument, I appreciate that Stephanie's kind of acknowledging this issue of, can't take responsibility for everything online, and this is her own path, and kind of exploring this platonic idea. I think she said something about, kind of critiquing the ideal therapist, and if I have an ideal therapist in mind. But if you read my book, you would know there really is no ideal therapist. There's only the ideal therapist that someone then projects onto their own practice, that someone sees and they say, I want to be like that. Maybe it's a supervisor, maybe it's a professor, maybe it's someone that they admired. They want to live up to that standard, which is an unachievable standard. And for some people, that standard is an influencer. That standard is someone who wants to make money. That standard is someone who wants to convey their opinions in a particular way that can ostracize or provoke. I found that, again, I think I agree with Stephanie that we kind of didn't really answer much. I think I'm left a little bit confused also about her kind of viewpoints on this. But my final argument, I think, is just what I've been saying all along. I'm not necessarily here to point fingers. I'm here to spread the word that a therapist could be struggling down the wrong path. They begin by saying, look, I'm here to advocate for parents who are struggling with their children who are transitioning. And then they suddenly devolve into, well, I'm going to have, a group subscription service online, or I'm going to have a discount codes for companies, and the money and the idea of getting likes and getting clicks then overwhelms the original idea that you had, which is to help people. And I'll just conclude with this, which is, I think, she says, you can't necessarily take responsibility for all the inflammatory remarks that are made online about you, with your memes. But in your professional opinion, in your professional standpoint, as a therapist, as someone who is signed on to help other people, to increase their mental health and well-being, if you can't monitor your online presence in some way that is copacetic with the ethics and moral values that you sought out to pursue as a therapist, I think you can't be online. You can't be an influencer, because those two things cannot coexist if you can't measure them just right. If you can't say, look, I'm going to take responsibility for what I say. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm a therapist, and I know that comes with power. 30,000 followers. It's a huge deal to a lot of people. And she's so much as admitted that people follow her and they respect her opinion. And if you can't say, well, look, I know I'm putting out stuff that's inflammatory. I know I'm provoking. I know I'm trolling. I know I'm making memes. I know I'm being satirical and silly. And, I can get taken out of context. But hey, I'm a person too. I think that can be a bit of a problem. I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. Does anyone want to hear me channel Jerry Springer?
Absolutely.
All right. Therapy as we know it, or used to know it, has been upended by genderism or gender ideology. Therapists, the industry itself, now requires, or professional bodies require therapists to affirm gender identities in kids. And that has changed therapy as we know it. And that is what we were talking about now when we're talking about therapy. So, I just wanted to say that.
That's it, Jerry?
No, that's not it.
All right.
I mean, Stephanie sure didn't start this. Stephanie, like in terms of ethics and moral values, the field has gone far astray from what we think of as the ethics and moral values that used to be. It probably happened before professional bodies started demanding affirmation only. But it's therapy today is so far from what therapy used to be. And this idea of people being, I think Sarah said, oh, are you a healer or a colluder? And the industry pretty much requires you to be some sort of colluder or you're out of the business. So that's the context that this is going on in. And it would be great if therapy as a field had the integrity that we once projected on it. I don't know if it ever actually had it. Therapists are among, yeah. I think that society really wants to believe that therapy works, that it's healing. It's sort of a dumping ground for what seem like intractable problems. Someone has like a real problem and people just really want to believe that you can send them to a therapist and their problem's going to get fixed, or that there are social problems or problems that can't be fixed by therapy, like growing up in poverty. uh you know People really want it to work, and that's just not what it's doing. And in many cases, the professional bodies are requiring it, therapists to do what I think is making things worse. You also, I think Sarah was talking about positions or opinions or something. Extremist opinions can break up families. And I think Sarah was saying that in reference to Stephanie. And it's like, yeah, extremist opinions, they're there. They're in the therapy industry and they are breaking up families. And extremist is not the same as minority. I think Stephanie's in a minority. But I think the therapy industry itself has gone pretty extremist.
All right. Well, I have one or two thoughts too, and then we'll say goodnight. My thought is that, goodness gracious, how often have I wished for there to be some sort of context where there's somebody who's outside of the field and that they make criticisms of people who are inside of the field, and that both of those people can come together and try to have a good faith conversation about those criticisms. And I think that when we look back, we'll say that there were a lot of things that were beneficial in this conversation, and there's maybe some things that we wish we could have, opportunities we could have used a little bit better. But gosh, I hope that one of the things that we see more of in the future is opportunities for people that have honest, good faith criticisms to be able to make them and to have them received and considered and externalized by people who are in positions to respond to them. So I wanted to thank you, Sarah, and you, Stephanie, for being just absolutely vital to creating an opportunity like this for people. So thank you both.
Yes, you both displayed courage, and that is in really short supply. So thank you both.
I thank both of you for the platform to be able to do this. I mean, this was a wonderful experience.
All right. Thanks, y'all. I'm going to hit the end stop button, and that's going to end the stream here.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, wait, Nina.
What?
There were a couple of people complaining that they didn't get to hear the Heterodorx jingle.
Oh.
Can you sing it really quick?
Yeah. Heterodorx, heterodox dorks.